This is an introduction into the Inference Inspector version 0.1.0. I have loaded as an example the pizza ontology from Stanford. If you just first look at the Inference tab for the first time, you see that it's out of sync. So the first thing I will do is I will run the reasoner. So what is happening now is that the Inference Inspector is creating a snapshot of the ontology with respect to a particular set of predefined inference entailment sets, for example, subclass axioms, equivalent class axioms, sub-object property axioms, and so on. And what it is showing here, it is showing the new entailments with respect to these entailment sets compared to the last time the reasoner was run. And of course, the first time the reasoner was run in the session, since this is the first time the reasoner was run in the session, we can see that these are basically all the inferences of the pizza ontology with respect to these entailment sets. Here you would see the lost entailments with respect to the last reasoner run. Obviously, now that we have just loaded the ontology, we do not have any lost entailments. And down here we have some consequences of new assertions, which are essentially the whether any given new axiom that we have in this ontology violates one of the OWL2 profiles, is a tautology, or whether it introduces stray signature. So let's take a look at an example. What happens if we change something? So let's delete has topping some fruit topping restriction on ice cream. Run the reasoner. So if we now look at the Inference Inspector, we see that we have a couple of lost inferences. For example, that ice cream is equivalent to nothing or subclass of nothing. So this means that it was unsatisfiable. Or that it was equivalent to cheesy vegetable topping, which is also unsatisfiable. And on the left side, we see that ice cream is now in the proper place in its hierarchy. So it's as a subclass of food, as opposed to a subclass of nothing. And here, which is you can see that there are still some unsatisfiable classes in the ontology. So this is very important to understand. This is not a new inference, but because we have selected this option, keep critical, we will keep defects such as unsatisfiable or unsatisfiabilities or an inconsistent ontology. We will keep this in view even if it's not new anymore. So for example, if I now just run the reasoner without making any changes, we will still see this one axiom here in the view because it hasn't been fixed. Yeah, so one of a couple of options. So the two main options that we need are, we have a history point selector. So for example, if I wanted to compare the current state of the ontology with a previous state, let's say with a state when I just loaded the ontology, I can click on the first snapshot that was taken. This is, are all the entailments compared to when I started out today with my first reasoner run. This is the second reasoner run, and so on. That's the other than this, I can also select different kinds of entailment sets. So, for example, at the moment, because of computational cost, we don't consider disjointness axioms. We might add in object property and data property characteristics axioms, or even select them in a more fine-grained fashion. By default, the Inference Inspector filters out tautologies. If we are interested in tautologies, we can put them back in using this option. And if we are interested in a set of entailments that are related to a particular subset of the signature, we can use this entity filter here in order to select the subset. So for example, if I'm interested in all the inferences that have something to do with food and has ingredient, then I just select them at this point. I can see here all of these are the inferences with respect to food and ingredients, all the axioms and the entailment sets that have food and ingredient in the signature. The next important thing is the priority table. So priorities are basically a way to sort axioms according to their importance. By default, this is user configurable. By default, we decide that the inconsistent ontology, unsatisfiability are of the highest priority. They're also marked in red. Then we have a bunch of other priorities depending on some particular axiom type. So, for example, this axiom pattern, asserted axiom, is if the axiom in the entailment set here was written asserted in the ontology, we deem it less interesting for the ontology engineer to look at. We might even choose to remove it from view entirely. But there are some other examples here: direct and indirect disjointness, and the most specific type were the more general types. Yeah, you can also make the same kind of priority distinctions with respect to the consequences of the new assertions down here. So if you, for example, by default, we deem DL profile violations more important than the EL, QL, and RL profile violations, but we also might not just simply not be interested in them at all, and we can remove them from view entirely. Yeah, so this, just one last thing. So if we wanted to look, we can use this focus selection option here in order to use the hierarchy or the protege hierarchies to restrict what we see in this entailment set window. So if I switch on this focus selected, then it will only show me the axioms with respect to the entities that I've selected on the left side. So for example, if I select meaty pizza, then I see all the axioms that have meaty pizza in the signature. Or if I select has ingredient, I will see only the inferences with respect to has ingredient. Okay, so this is the basic introduction. Thank you for listening.